Hi guys, I'm Beth and this is Read Remark. Today we are going to talk about two books, Sleeping Beauties and The Outsider. Thank you so much for joining today. We are going to be talking about a pair of kings, and I mean that in two senses of the word. The first sense is that one of the books, Sleeping Beauties, is written by two kings, Owen King and his father, Stephen King. The second one is another book by Stephen King, this one called The Outsider. First, I'm going to tell you a truly terrifying tale, one which booktubers and really anyone who's made a video ever can probably relate to. This is not my first time to film this video. I actually filmed this a few days ago, only to find, after getting home and starting to edit it, that the microphone died. Unbeknownst to me, the microphone gave out just a little ways into the filming and I couldn't use any of it. Yikes! Here's me awkwardly talking with no sound at all. Yeah, not upset about that at all. So here we are again doing a take two, and for this one I decided to sit next to my book cart full of Stephen King and Dean Koontz books because I am hashtag trendy like that. Of course I had to go out and buy the cart after seeing it appear on Instagram 50 times. So here's number 51. On to the books. The first one, The Sleeping Beauties, is written by Owen King and Stephen King. It concerns a strange phenomenon that begins to happen to women around the world. Once they fall asleep, they start to wrap up into a cocoon. So, you know, as their eyes drift closed, the silken threads will start to thread out from their hair, from their bodies, and just wrap them up into a cocoon in which they sleep for an indeterminate time. Now, if you try to wake up one of these women, she will go into almost like a fever state where she's not really herself. She'll come out, kill the offending person who woke her up, and then fall right back into her deep slumber, enshrined again within her cocoon. The main action of this story happens within a small town in which some sort of godlike figure named Eve appears. She's at the women's prison and she has all sorts of extraordinary powers. Now, whether she is a sort of deity or whether she is a satanic spirit, good, evil, avenging angel, we're not quite clear on that. But she does have these otherworldly powers in which she is not afflicted with sleepiness, and she seems to hold all the power for mankind within her hands. Now, what happens to the women once they fall asleep? I'm not going to tell you because I believe that it is a big part of the story, but I will say that the book itself raises some very interesting questions about gender. It makes you think about a world of men without women in it, the way the social dynamics happen there. And then you also think about a world of women without men in it. Now, the other book, The Outsider, was written by just Stephen King. Really interesting choice and title there, considering that The Outsiders is such a big, iconic book by S.E. Hinton as well. But this is an entirely different sort of outsider. It starts off with no supernatural element to it whatsoever. There's a murder of a young child that's done in a really horrific way, and then there are more murders that happen as well. It's kind of what John from one of my very favorite all-time podcasts, S-Town, would call a clusterfuck of sorrow. So it starts off almost as like a police procedural kind of crime book where the sheriff is following this crime that happened, thinks he found the guy. It may not be as straightforward as he thought. And that's where the supernatural element starts to come in with this outsider who may have some sort of nefarious means of making bad stuff happen. Now, both of these books featured some things that I enjoyed very much, one of which is the unlikely hero. In The Outsiders, for example, it's Holly, this woman who we don't even meet for at least half the book. She's odd, she's quirky, She, oh boy, she has definitely a personality, but somehow she manages to really save the day. Same thing with the Sleeping Beauties. Jeanette, this prisoner who's there for good reason, winds up being a major player in causing peace among people. Both books also feature heroes who are definitely fallible. They're not perfect. They're, you know, even though they're the leaders that can stand on the hill and lead the masses, they make fatal mistakes that haunt them for the rest of their lives. Another thing that I liked about both books is that they also name-check famous authors. Dean Koontz and Harlan Coben, two of my favorite authors, in fact, get name-checked in both of those books. So it's kind of very meta and delightful to get to see those shout-outs. Now, an interesting thing about Stephen King in general is just how wordy he is. And it makes it really interesting that I go for that, because usually I'm a pretty straightforward person. I like things to be precise and concise. I think there's a real beauty and artistry in brevity. In fact, my favorite book of 2017 was Lindsay Hunter's Eat Only When You're Hungry, and she packed a wallop of a story into a very short book. Stephen King is completely on the other end of the spectrum. Something that someone might be able to say in 50 words, he'll say in 500. But within those 500 words, he manages to develop the story, the character, the worlds in such a rich, vibrant way that I'm willing to go along on the ride with him, which is not something I grant to just any author, but for Stephen King, I'm there for it. Robert, the wonderful booktuber over at Barter Hordes, asked for my recommendations on getting started with Stephen King. So instead of writing out a big long list, although I will write it out in the description below, I wanted to go ahead and give you my completely subjective list of really good Stephen King books to start out with. Now, of course, I'm no Stephen King expert, so there's my disclaimer there. Feel free to chime in on the comments on better selections or things that you would recommend to Robert or to me as well to read in the Stephen King canon. So the first one I'm going to recommend is, of course, The Shining. This was made into a really good movie. Stephen King was a little bit middling on whether he liked the Stanley Kubrick movie or not because it departed so much from the book. But I thought it was really artistic, really masterful. But the book was even more, it was even more shiny. It was even scarier. So definitely read the book if you haven't read the book. And also the companion, Dr. Sleep, that he wrote many decades later. I really enjoyed that one as well. Misery is another one that was made into a movie. The book is even creepier, which is kind of hard to fathom because the movie itself was so creepy. Of course, The Stand is held up as one of Stephen King's best books of all time. It is epic. It's very long, over 1,000 pages, but it's so good. It's this epic battle between good and evil personified. That one, as well as 11/22/63, are both often held up as his best. I haven't read 11/22/63, partly because I'm kind of intimidated by how long it is. That hasn't really stopped me with Stephen King before, so I'm sure I'm going to get to it eventually. Another one I really like of Stephen King is actually from his Richard Bachman days. This was his pen name that he used, either because he wanted to go even darker with the Richard Bachman pen name, or because he was just so prolific that he needed to have another name to publish under. But The Long Walk is one of those rare, tight, concise novels. In fact, I think some people call it just a novella. It is a dystopian world, although there's not much world building that goes on. 100 young men have to go on a long walk, and the last one standing gets whatever he wants for the rest of his life. If the other young men fall along the way, as they fall, they die. They get shot. There are men with machine guns along the path ready to shoot them dead as soon as they fall. One thing I really appreciate in Stephen King, though, is his short stories, some of which, of course, admittedly are not that short, but I'm going to just rapid fire recommend several of my favorites, although this is not by any means an exhaustive list because I enjoy so many of his short stories. One is Dolan's Cadillac, about a man getting revenge against a mob boss who had done his wife wrong. Another is The End of the Whole Mess, one of my all-time favorite short stories that is about a genius boy who becomes a man. When he finally realizes what a mess the world is, he tries to invent something to make it better, and of course it backfires. Really good story. Another one is Gray Matter, in which a man drinks haunted beer. It's somehow, the beer has turned in a way in which drinking it turns him into this big gray people-eating blob. Another is The Mangler, about a haunted laundry machine, and trust me, it's so much better and scarier than I'm making it sound, but it's so good. Another really good one is 1408, about a haunted hotel room. I think you kind of see a trend of where I'm going here. Another really good one is called The Raft, about a haunted spot within a little river. Teens play hooky one day, go out on a raft in the middle of the river, and a haunted spot appears and starts eating them one by one. Really good. My favorite of all time, though, by him, which I don't really hear many other people holding up, so it might be more of a sentimental favorite just for me, is Mrs. Todd's Shortcut. Oh, it's so good. It's mythical, and there's this old man named Homer, who is kind of shooting the breeze with his buddy on the porch. He's talking about this woman, Mrs. Todd, who would take these jaunts between towns and was always trying to come up with a shortcut to get a faster way to get there, shave off just a few minutes, and taking these more outlandish routes to try and not just get the way the bird flies on the map, but to actually somehow bend the map and get there that way. So as she comes back from these jaunts, she has these increasingly strange creatures stuck to the front grille of her car, and Homer is wondering what in the world is going on with Mrs. Todd. Mythical magic! That's what's going on with Mrs. Todd. Of course, I would be remiss if I did not mention The Plant, which was a story that King was working on several years ago. I'm wanting to say around 20 years ago. This story is the reason that my mom holds a long-time grudge against Stephen King and refuses to read him to this day. Way back then, Stephen King had put out a serialized book on the honor system electronically called The Plant, about a haunted plant. It was really good. He would release pieces of it at a time. People would kind of pay as they go on the honor system, and as long as people kept paying, he would keep putting out pieces of The Plant. But eventually Stephen King just petered out, lost interest in the book, and let it lie. He just let it go. By then, both Mom and I were hooked. We were hooked, and we were so mad that Stephen King just dropped us in the middle of this book that we were enjoying very much. So I've managed to get over my disappointment pretty easily, but my mom, no. So if anyone has a direct line to Stephen King, tell him to get back on that so that he can gain one more follower in his literary pursuits. Alright, that's all I've got for today, guys. What are your favorite Stephen King books? Let me know in the comments and I will be happy to discuss it with you. Disagree with me, agree with me, go in a completely different direction. I can't wait to hear what you think. Thank you so much for watching as always, and I will catch you next time, hopefully with a fully working microphone so that I can only film once as opposed to twice. Thanks. See ya. Bye.